This story has 4 sections. We shall discuss each of these sections separately and at the end sum up our discussion. In the first section we are introduced to Dookie and his wife Jariya. Both of them are making preparations to welcome the Brahman. Dookie is a tanner who in the traditional Hindu social order are untouchables. Their job is to work with hides and remove dead animals. They belong to the lowest strata of the society. Ironically, he is named Dookie, sorrowful, to ward off evil. We see feverish activity in the Dookie household. Dookie is sweeping the floor clean and his wife is plastering cow dung on the floor. Cow dung is believed to clean and purify. Interestingly, the discussion between Dookie and his wife is centered around making their house fit for the visit of a holy man, the Brahman. We get a glimpse into the social norms prevalent in the village. The caste hierarchies are such that no one would give them even a pot of water if they asked for it. So instead of a cot they decide on making a mat of mowa leaves for the Brahman to sit on when he visits. They must also offer the Brahman food as offering, but they cannot offer it in their own utensil because it is considered impure. So they decide to offer food on a leaf once again. Juri is advised to buy the offering from the village merchant but not to touch anything because the touch of the untouchable is impure. She is advised to take the help of the Gond girl who is a tribal girl. The tribes do not belong to the Hindu fold and consequently escape the rigid caste laws. Dookie makes a list of offering to be made which seems quite impressive considering the status of Dookie. Finally he leaves for the Pandit's house to invite him with a big bundle of grass as a present. This section not only introduces us to the main characters and the setting, it also in a very subtle way lays bare the tension and hypocrisy present in a rigid, caste-based society. While Dookie is considered an untouchable, whose touch pollutes whatever he touches, his offering and gifts are accepted by the Brahman. Dookie lives on the margins of this society. He has no rights, only obligations and duties. At the same time, Dookie seems to be a willing partner in the perpetuation of this system. He seems willing because he is kept ignorant and he is made to believe that indeed the Brahman is a holy man. In the earlier essay, Caste Laws, Jyotirao Phule has pointed out the very same problem. Brahmins with their cunning not only cornered all the privileges but also made the other castes believe that they were inferior to the Brahmins. The Brahmins were supposed to have come out of the mouth of Lord Vishnu, whereas the Sudras came out of his feet. Hence the Sudra was created to serve the Brahman. The Sudra was not allowed to study the scriptures, hence he had to believe what was told to him by the Brahman. The Brahmins, thus, through a combination of myth-making and denial of education, kept the Sudra oppressed. This situation prevails even in the 20th century India. Sadgati was written in 1931. But Premchand has allowed us a glimpse of the holiness of the Brahman through the eyes of Dookie. This Brahman seems to be very religious. You know what a stickler he is about religion and doing things according to the rule. But he seems to have a terrible temper too. He flies off the handle very fast. And when he does get angry he spares no one, including his wife and son. He beat up his son so badly that it resulted in a broken hand for his son. Some holiness indeed. The second section brings us to the house of Pandit Gasaram. After a short account of Pandit Gasaram's devotion to God and rituals, we witness the meeting between Pandit Gasaram and Dookie. Pandit Gasaram on his return from the temple finds Dookie at his door. Dookie immediately prostrates himself on the ground. Dookie, on being asked, states his purpose for the visit. Dookie wants the Pandit to visit his house and pick on an auspicious date for his daughter's betrothal. Pandit Gasaram, sensing an opportunity to get some work done for free, immediately sets him off on errands. He orders Dookie to plaster the floor of his sitting room with cow dung, and then split the wood and to take out the hay and put it in the barn. Dookie, conditioned to obey orders of the Brahmins, immediately sets out to work. Unfortunately, Dookie had nothing since morning and he was terribly hungry. The Brahmin was not offering him any food. He decides to smoke a pipe instead. But his own house was a mile away. But Brahmins, unlike the low castes and untouchables, did not smoke tobacco. Dookie remembers the lone Gond who stayed in the village. He visits the Gond who offers him both a pipe and the tobacco. But Dookie needs to light his pipe. He returns to the Pandit's house and asks for a light. The Pandit asks his wife to give Dookie a light. This upsets the Panditayan and she reminds Pandit Gasaram about the caste laws. The Pandit on the other hand reminds her of the free labor that Dookie is rendering and goads her to relent. Finally the Panditayan relents and throws a piece of coal at Dookie. Dookie smokes his pipe and gets back to work. He works hard at splitting the wood but lacks the experience to do it. The Panditayan feels a little pity for Dookie because in the act of throwing a piece of coal at Dookie, she almost singed him. She wonders if they could give Dookie something to eat. After some deliberation they decide that feeding Dookie was not worth the effort. So Dookie keeps working without a morsel in his stomach. This section focuses on the hard-hearted nature of the Brahmin couple, the servile mentality of Dookie and the exploitative nature of caste system. The Brahmin's holiness is almost entirely constituted in the meaningless rituals that he follows religiously. Ironically, the first part of the ceremony of worship consists of preparing bhang, an intoxicant, and the reward for the rituals is a steady stream of clients at his doorstep every day. The Brahmin is in the business of religion and it seems quite lucrative too. The Brahmin's meaningless self-decoration and other rituals have very little to do with God or people. But the Brahmin sees it as an investment that generates a fair amount of business. Dookie, on the other hand, hardly understands anything about these rituals. But his servile mind perceives holiness in what appears unremarkable to us, the Pandit's glorious figure. Poulet, in the earlier essay, talked about mental slavery. We see that mental slavery acted out here through the actions of Dookie. His mental subjugation is complete, so much so that the sight of the Pandit fills him with reverence. The sandalwood markings on the rotund figure of the Pandit appears godly to Dookie and he is more than willing to do the Pandit's bidding. What we see next is a fine example of the cunning, the greed and the hard-hearted nature of the Pandit and his wife. When Dookie pleads with the Pandit to grace his house and pick an auspicious date for his daughter's wedding, the Pandit immediately seizes the opportunity to exploit Dookie's labor. Not only does he exploit Dookie's labor, he even fails to relate to Dookie as a human being. Tired and hungry, Dookie keeps working but the Pandit does not have the decency to offer him any refreshment. Moreover, his attitude towards Dookie is inhuman. Dookie hears the conversation between the Pandit and his wife where the wife chides the Pandit for allowing a tanner inside the house. But instead of hurt or anger we see him in agreement with the Panditayan's arguments. He has no respect for himself. He reasons that the Brahmins are clean and holy and consequently all unclean and impure people including himself must worship and respect the Brahmins. The extent of Dookie's mental slavery becomes very clear in this scene. Though abused and humiliated, he refuses to blame anyone except himself and accepts it as his due. Dookie sets about the job of splitting the wood after smoking the pipe. In the meanwhile, the Gond visits him and tells him of the futility of his efforts. The Gond is sympathetic to Dookie and inquires if Dookie has had anything to eat. He also helps in chopping the wood for some time before he gives up. He advises Dookie to give up the work for which he is not being paid, and then he takes his leave. Dookie, for a moment, considers quitting the work. But he is unable to summon the courage to do it. He starts shifting the hay from the store to the fodder bin. Tired, hungry and exhausted, he falls asleep. In the meanwhile, the pandit after a nice nap comes out and finds Dookie asleep. Instead of being thankful for the service rendered by Dookie, he starts belittling him and his caste. He also threatens Dookie with unpleasant consequences if the work is not completed. Dookie is shaken. After all, if the pandit refuses to pick an auspicious day, then the marriage would be a disaster. A mix of awe, respect and fear gets hold of Dookie and he gets into a state of delirium. He works the axe so hard that after some time his tired and exhausted body gives up. He is dead. The death of Dookie complicates the story a little. Dookie dies in a Brahmin village, save the Gond. Removing the body of the tanner becomes a problem. The Gond's subversive activity complicates the issue further. The Gond tells the tanners in their village that if they touched the body of Dookie they would get into trouble with the police. Consequently, the tanners do not pick up Dookie's body. Moreover, Dookie's wife, daughter and a dozen tanner women go to Pandit Gasiram's home to mourn. The scene ends in a stalemate. This section, apart from reinforcing the hard-heartedness and cunning of the pandit and the mental servility of Dookie, introduces a new theme. The possibility of upsetting the caste hierarchies as presented by the Gond. The Gond is an outsider in the sense that he does not belong to the Hindu fold. Though he also lives on the margins of this society, he is not mentally enslaved as the tanner. He is able to see things in their perspective and is able to see through the exploitation and meanness of the so-called holy pandit. Chihori contrasts the holy pandit with the colonial administration and finds the latter better. For, as he says, even if the government forced you to work, they at least paid for your labor. The proddings of Chihori forces Dookie to contemplate quitting Pandit's work. The Gond had made him aware that Pandit Gasiram and the caste system was more exploitative than the colonial administration. But Dookie lacks the courage to rebel against it. Further, Pandit Gasiram's threat about not finding an auspicious date for the wedding of the daughter forces Dookie to abandon all thoughts of rebellion. On the other hand, Dookie's pitiable condition evokes no pity in the Pandit's heart. Dookie, with stomach pasted to his backbone, kept axing the wood which was as hard as steel. Even Dookie's death does not move the Brahman. It is only an irritant for him. The Gond tries to fan a revolt by asking the tanners to refrain from touching the body. Dookie's corpse lies in front of Pandit Gasiram's house in a state which is worse than a dead animal. The utter insensitivity of the Brahmins is revealed when we see them more worried about the pollution rather than trying to give the man a decent burial. This seems even more appalling when we consider the fact that Dookie died while serving Pandit Gasiram. The attitude of the Brahmins is made amply clear by the remark of one old woman who says, "Why don't you have this body thrown away? Throw away the body of Dookie as one throws away the carcass of a dead animal." Dookie's corpse lies in front of the Brahmin's house as no one would touch it. The tanner women keep up their weeping and lamentations late into the night. The corpse begins to stink. But for Pandit Gasiram and his wife this is only an irritant. After an uneasy night, Pandit Gasiram decides to take matter into his own hands. He manages to get a noose tied around the dead man's feet and drags the corpse to the fields outside the village. After he gets back, he takes a bath and performs the purification rites. The abandoned body of Dookie in the fields becomes food for the scavengers, jackals, kites, dogs and crows. The story ends with an extremely ironic comment. This was the reward of a whole life of devotion, service and faith. There is poignancy to this short concluding section which makes us acutely aware of the inhumanity of the caste system. Dookie, literally, dies a dog's death. There is a jarring contrast between the weeping and the insensitive, callous attitude of Pandit Gasaram and his wife. It is difficult to miss the profound irony of the ending. What Dookie could not achieve in life he manages to do that in his death. Pandit Gasaram, who considers the touch of Dookie polluting, is forced to drag the dead body of Dookie himself. This subversion was possible, of course, due to the effort of Chihori, the Gond. But the price was a dog's death for Dookie, left in the field to be devoured by scavengers.